Hello YouTube. Oblivion is some of my all-time favorite characters from the Elder Scrolls series, and one of my absolute favorites that often gets overlooked is the Count of Skingrad, Janus Hassildor, a mysterious ruler with a damning secret because he's a vampire, but he's not one of the bad ones. So, that having been said, let's roll the intro and talk about his story. So, as most people know, every county in Cyrodiil is ruled by either a count or a countess. They are an important part of the Cyrodiilic government and serve an important role in ruling the province, keeping order and boosting morale for the people in hard times. The counts in different counties of Cyrodiil enjoy various levels of popularity among their people, with some having a quite high approval rating and some having a lower approval rating. But there is one count who, despite never actually appearing in public and almost never meeting with any of his subjects, still enjoys a great popularity with his people, the Count of Skingrad, Count Janus Hassildor. He is rarely seen in public, with almost none of his citizens ever having seen him in real life, as anyone who has business with the Count will generally have to meet with one of his aides or advisors rather than with the Count himself. The excuse for this given by the Skingrad government is that the Count is a shy and reclusive person. And while some may doubt this official explanation, most of his subjects in County Skingrad have forgiven him this eccentricity, as he is generally loved by most of his subjects for keeping Skingrad prosperous and peaceful over the course of his long reign, as their lives are good and Skingrad is rich. Of course, there are some out there who question the Count's shyness and who think that there's something more going on, but most people generally don't care and just shrug it off as long as the Count does his job correctly. But, as you may have guessed since I just literally spoiled it in the intro, those who ask questions are correct. Because the reason the Count is so very rarely seen in public, and while when he's seen that's only in darkness, is because he's a vampire. You see, around 50 or 55 years before the Oblivion crisis, Count Janus Hassildor and his wife Rona Hassildor were infected with vampirism, leading them to eventually becoming full-fledged vampires. This was all by accounts a disaster for them, as by this time Count Janus Hassildor was already a count, and he was already quite beloved by the people, and if the public would ever find out about his vampirism, that could end his tenure and possibly ruin his life and negate his accomplishments in the eyes of the public. So, in short, he and his wife's entire lives would be ruined. So, he decided to keep his affliction, vampirism, a secret and only tell his very trusted and close confidants of this situation, asking them to become his mouthpiece while he would continue to rule Skingrad. The only ones who officially knew that the Count and his wife were vampires were those in the castle that he trusted, and presumably also the Emperor, as the Emperor would often meet face to face with the Counts of the province, and as such I presume that he knew of Hassildor's situation, although we don't have any confirmation for that, unfortunately. Anyway, he and his wife would live most of their lives in the back rooms of the castle, where none except for the most trusted servants were allowed to come. While in the meantime he was looking for a cure to their vampirism, as Janus and his wife realized that the Count is crowd shy excuse would only carry them so far. However, despite looking desperately for a cure, they never found one, and so Janus Hassildor was forced to accept that his life would simply drastically change forever, and that if he would continue to rule Skingrad, it would be from the shadows. He then decided to embrace the immortality and powers that came with vampirism, starting to present himself as a powerful reclusive mage, so that the people of the county would presume that he used complex life-extending magic to live for such a long time, instead of vampirism. He also arranged that he was able to drink blood without having to attack people. We don't exactly know how this worked, but it's likely that this blood was either taken from criminals or blood voluntarily given by his close servants, as it said that he drank blood only when he absolutely had no other choice and had to drink it to simply prevent bad side effects, but other than that, he would never drink blood. It was all one big perfect arrangement, except that his wife Rona, whom he loved very much, could not accept their situation, and she hated what she'd become. She refused to drink the blood required to sustain her, which eventually led to her falling into a deep coma, a sort of limbo between life and death for a vampire from which she could not escape. And while the Count's trusted servants did their best to keep her sustained, She simply did not want this existence and thus remained in the coma. But she also did not want to die as a vampire, because that would likely mean that her soul would disappear in the realm of Molag Bal, not something that the average person would want. So, for her sake, Count Hassildor kept searching for a cure to the vampirism, if only so that he could cure his wife before death, so that her soul could find peace. But there was only so much that he could do, as he could not venture out of the city for long periods of time to search for a cure, as that would draw the wrong kind of attention. And as such, he actually became quite lonely without his wife to keep him company while governing Skingrad as best he could. Now, while some, of course, developed suspicions, most people seem to have believed the story of the life-extending spells, and those who did not and suspected the Count of being a vampire quickly stopped caring, as during his reign Count Hassildor demonstrated that his heart was in the right place despite his affliction, because he kept necromancers and other vampires firmly out of the city, because while other vampires assumed that with a vampiric count they might have easy pickings in Skingrad and that the Count would allow them to feed on the population, Count Hassildor saw other vampires as dirty animals who gave into their primal instincts and should be ashamed, and thus kept them out of his city. Meanwhile, he also did what he could to keep vampire hunters at arm's length, as he often had them dealt with clandestinely, either by luring them away from the city peacefully or having them dealt with in other unofficial ways, trying to make sure that he was never linked to the efforts to get rid of the hunters, in order for him not to fall under suspicion of being a vampire, of course, or hating vampire hunters, as that would lead people towards the wrong kind of conclusions. We as the player can actually help him with this, as we can help him get rid of some vampires who try to enter his city, but we can also help him then by keeping some hunters out of the city so that they don't figure out his secret. The man really just wants to be left alone and trying to do the best that he can for his people, and I can respect that. Now, in the game, Janus Hassildor plays a pretty important role for any player trying to cure themselves of vampirism, as in order to find a cure, you can help him finish his research into a cure for vampirism so that he can cure his wife, and that you can cure yourself. In the quest you can go out into the world to finish his research and then bring the cure back to him. We then get to see a quite touching scene where his wife is woken from the coma and given the cure for vampirism. Unfortunately, she was so weak that after almost 50 years in a coma, she did not survive the cure, but her soul was then able to find peace, something which the then grieving Count is happy for. Now, while we don't know what became of Count Hassildor after the events of the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion, as we literally know nothing of his whereabouts after the game, I do have some speculations, but keep in mind these are based on nothing except for what I think based on his character and what I'd like to see. Because if I had to guess, and again this is just speculation based on nothing, I think that he kept ruling the city until perhaps the Stormcrown Interregnum, that period of time when the Empire completely fractured and fell apart after the death of its last interim ruler, Potentate Okato. Video on that whole business in the description. Now, I think that in the Stormcrown Interregnum he likely did everything he could to keep Skingrad out of the chaos and keep the city prosperous and safe while the rest of the country descended into chaos. And I think, again, this is all speculation, that when order returned to the land and a new Imperial dynasty unified the Empire again, the Mede dynasty, he may have cured himself of vampirism eventually and passed the torch to another Count, and eventually probably joined his wife, who we very much missed, in the afterlife. But that's just all speculation based on nothing. It's also possible that he is still Count by the time of Skyrim, or perhaps he lives a secluded life somewhere away from the public after stepping away. We simply don't know. And that is about all I can say about Count Janus Hassildor, and I sincerely hope that you enjoyed this video and that I managed to teach you something new about the Elder Scrolls universe. And if I did, why not give the video a like, as that's how the mighty YouTube algorithm decides what content is worthy and what content isn't. Anyway, all that's left for me to be done is to thank my top Patreon supporters, Mr. Bernardo Binda, Gabriel Binda, Doji, Hunter Joe, KLegendM, King Chris 20, RB Dash, Volkior of Argonia, Devin Mattingly, Rakai and Sordo Bushido. These people, along with all the others on screen, keep my channel afloat, and for that I am very grateful. That said, I will see you all in the next Elder Scrolls lore video, probably next week,